Are GLPs affecting your restaurant? No, not really, actually. And now I'm going to explain why to you. And I'm not pulling really any punches here. So, part one, right? Stats for nerds. Now, I'm no statistician. I don't think many of you watching this are either, but we're going to dive headlong into some numbers in this first part. And then, right around part two, the second half, hopefully, we're going to dive into what this means and how I think people are interpreting headlines and making decisions around it. So, some of our sources that we're going to work with here, right? Got a January report from 2026, actually, from the CDC. It's going to be article number 1 down in the resources. Has a lot of important stats. I'm probably going to try to do some editing, maybe drop in a couple previews or some floating headlines here. We have 40.1 million estimated, or around 12% of the US population with diabetes, either diagnosed or undiagnosed, and a whopping stat of 115 million people in the US being pre-diabetic, which is like actually crazy, but so we're going to move past that. Then we're going to go right into source number 2, CDC NCHS brief number 537, right? This one gets into a lot more kind of granular data. This is back from 2025, but I'd say still recent enough. What they talk about is essentially not just the incidence rates, but the number of people who are prescribed GLP to deal with life conditions like obesity, diabetes, etc., right? And so we see actually about a 26.5% general prescription rate for this, and a peak of 33.3% usage rate in the age range of 50 to 64-year-olds. Keep that in mind. It's going to come back up later. The GLP injectable use is substantially higher among those with higher BMI, right? Also keep that in mind because we're going to kind of cycle back to that later, laying some groundwork. So when we look at some of these percentages, 26%, 33%, 12% of the population with diabetes, and then we start thinking about restaurants and how do they fall into this category and how does this affect revenue, I don't think it's going to turn out the way that you think it does, right? Because even if you hear 12% and you're like, oh, wow, that's a lot of people, 12% is almost 20%. 20% of my restaurant being on GLP inhibitors is really going to affect the numbers. No. So I'd like to highlight this. It's RAND.org, and they conducted this really great poll, actually. I mean, when you think about the way that this works out, statistically speaking, right, the RAND.org poll was almost like 8.8 thousand people. The question that they asked was, have you ever used a GLP product? And this is really interesting because they're not talking specifically to or about diabetics. They polled 8.8 thousand people, and it's supposed to be a distributed average of like varieties of people representing like, a statistically useful portion of America. And I think they did a great job because you see the headline and it says 12% of people report using GLP. Once again, the whole rabbit hole of 12% is like almost 20, and 20% means I'm going to lose money as a restaurant. But then we're going to compare this to Axios. This article is from 2025, as is the RAND.org report. And we're already going to see a bunch of other numbers thrown in around here. Is it 12% as reported by RAND.org, or is it 2% as cited in Axios, or is it 4%? Because there's a graph that shows 4% with the y-axis really doing big lifting to show how big these bars are for annual health insurance claims between 19 and 24. So looking at RAND.org, 12% versus 4% or even 2% using it for weight loss and things on this Axios article, we kind of get some confusing information, right? So 12% from the RAND.org incidence rate weirdly matches the overall incidence rate for diabetes. And if you're conducting a poll actually across national averages that finds related health data to a Center for Disease Control study, I'd say you're actually polling really, really well. Your stats, your sample selection is great. I think the big crux of this issue is, for one, they ask if they've ever used GLPs, not if they're currently using it. Does that mean they were on it for a week? Does that mean they were on it for a month? Does that mean they're using it now? We don't know, because that's not what they're asking. It's just, have you ever touched a GLP? So that's really going to conflate a bunch of the numbers. And then, second of all, if we think about this, you're probably saying, oh, it's a little false equivalence. Just because the numbers look the same doesn't mean that they are the same. Uh, the RAND report found a spike in people in the exact same age range of that 50 to 60, and actually found that women on average use GLP inhibitors more than men. But uh, when you're seeing the exact same age range spikes, when you're seeing an overall incidence rate, it kind of really goes to show that your polling is pretty accurate. And I don't think it's going to be any surprise that it's around 12% because it is inherently tied. The big thing here is that this drug is primarily used for diabetes and weight management in a prescription sense, right? So, now that I've kind of introduced some of these numbers and given you the cavalcade of resources to go read on your own and find out whether or not I'm an idiot or if I'm pulling numbers out of my ass, more power to you. But this is going to be part two here, right? Is let's get down to brass tacks, Lamar, right? The RAND paints a very different picture, I think, of what's going on, and it's supported by our CDC source in talking about the prescription use and the health status of people being prescribed GLPs. And I'm just going to say it. Restaurateurs and people who are worried about this topic, you're profiling your customers, right? And you should not do that, right? You're not conducting legitimate surveys. You shouldn't be asking people for private health information or making assumptions about their private health information, table side or looking at them or anything, right? Like you just shouldn't be doing any of that to begin with. You see trends and certain customers, and you say, well, of course they're eating and drinking less. Everyone's using this miracle drug now, right? And so let's really look at that, right? Ignoring the way you imagine a guest in your restaurant using a GLP inhibitor and how it's affecting your bottom line versus what the actual health data says about people who are actually using it to manage conditions and improve their health. 12% is 1 in 8 people, right? Because 20 is 1 in 5, so then we go down a step here. If we really look at 1 in 8 customers, right? So 1 every 8 top, 1 every 2 4 tops. 12% of your customer base declining their consumption by a total 15% off of their check average is only like 2% total revenue to begin with, right? And you just multiply the coefficients, right? Or multiply them like a probability, right? So I mean, like, I don't know anyone who's ever told me explicitly what their like losses are from GLP. They just kind of point at it vaguely and they go, well, this is a problem costing us money. And I don't know, like, it just doesn't seem like great marketing. You're not even quantifying your losses, and it just, that's messy. And I think that, you're talking about being down to trends that predate GLP-1, like inflation, value perception, changing palates and digestional preferences, like smaller bites, the non-alcoholic beverage movement, right? Like, these things aren't like solely tied to GLP, and for the most part actually predate this anyway. So I think you're like externalizing the cause and saying like, oh, well, it's not that consumer demands are changing. It's not that I'm not meeting consumer demands. It's that there's just this miracle drug that everyone's on because I see all these skinny people in my restaurant, and probably I'm putting some words in your mouth there. But I mean, like I said, I think people are profiling customers and saying like, well, this kind of customer isn't doing what I expect them to do, so this is the explanation for it. And like I said, that's bad. Don't do that. Stop doing that. And let's look at the real data, right? Going back to that Axios article from Stats for Nerds, right? When we see 4% on the annual health claims, I don't know why I'm turning my head that far. We see that 4% on annual health claims, right? Like, that's actually like 1 in 25, right? And so even if 1 in 25 is like actually dropping their consumption like massively, like by 25%, right? So 4 times 25 is 1, and then since we've got so many decimal points, that's still only 1% of total revenue lost to share to GLP, right? And I mean, that's way different. I mean, a 25% average check drop, is that supported across all of your check data, all of your revenue centers? Like, is to go still seeing normal guest check expenditure? There's no data. There's all this like panic and all these like inflammatory headlines with stats and numbers in there that, you know, people just aren't using critically or analyzing mathematically, right? So I think the big nail in the coffin here that I'm going to drop on you, and this is a little bit more stats for nerds, but they're kind of like flat numbers here. This other resource, it's going to be probably number 5 on the resource list, is the Becker's report. And so Novo Nordisk or Novdisk, whatever, these are the guys that like have the patents, I think, for the particular isolate for like Ozempic and Wegovy and just a couple of these other Pokemon sounding things. And, you know, Becker's talks about them surpassing 25 million people treated globally. I'm going to rewind that for a second, right? So these are the guys who make the money off of selling and holding the intellectual rights to like the thing. And their bouncer counter is at 25 million people treated globally. So, you know, let's just do a little thought experiment. Let's say the top 4 markets for this would be what? The United States, the UK, China, and Germany. I've done some research on this. 25 million globally. Let's even assume that 50% of that, which is a big assumption, that half of the customers, and there's all kinds of explanations for it, right? The diabetes incidence rate, the pre-diabetes, the weight problem in the US, right? Let's assume that 50% of that market share is all located in the United States. Well, one half of 25 is 12.5 million, which, double checking my numbers, is around 3.6% of the population. That's oddly close to the 4% number that is being battered around about insurance claims in the US with the Axios source, right? And like I said, modeling a 25% miss at 4% of your of total customers is still only 1% total revenue. I mean, you know, you're probably going to argue, oh, well, it's not a 25% miss, it's a 40% miss. But still, if it's only based off of 4% of your total customer pool, I don't think you guys are really coming to me with the math. You're coming to me with feelings, right? And it's just not working out for me here. The alternative to this, and I think a big explanation that people are going to fall back onto, which, good work, just released, literally just released while I was doing some research on this, about recreational peptide use. We're going to put that in air quotes or something, right? And I 100% you recommend go check out. This is great journalism, great sense of humor, great, you know, take. I mean, they take people seriously and let them express themselves and talk about, I think, things that are probably a little bit outside of mainstream journalistic exploration. You know, this gray market for these research peptides that people are ordering from wherever, and, you know, the largest portion of the gray market is from China, but you could be buying them from Missouri for all I care. I don't care where they come from, right? This allows you to describe a different profile of customer where you're like, oh, it's all these hip young people who are using this for personal motives as opposed to like medically defined and navigated health spaces. Because like I said, the CDC report verifies, right? The majority of people using this are higher in BMI, they're older, they're facing insulin resistance issues, and they're using this to treat medical conditions and navigate their health and lifestyle. The harsh part about this, though, is that the gray market, it cuts both ways, right? There's no real polling data on this. There's not really, there is some comprehensive like studies about this. It is a big gray market, and we're totally going to admit that. I think it's like the FDA or a couple of other people like have these reports published, and I think even like the post office was talking about like intercepting some of these packages and being like, hey, yeah, no, we know this is not for research use, like no, and like punishing things and confiscating product and everything. But, you know, that's about as close as we get, right, to the volume of what's going on in this like gray market recreational peptide use. And the other thing is that there's a bunch of individual studies and reports talking about examining what people are ordering by this like drop ship peptide company or whatever is going on here. We don't even know what they're getting, right? Like there's huge variance in product quality, proper dosage, concentration, and all this other stuff, right? So it just doesn't really work out to support your argument that you can't point to this massive kind of like going on over here with no significant data, no quality control on any of these things or the dosage or how people are using it explicitly, and say like, yeah, well, no, this is the actual source. Like, oh, it was bad enough when it was just prescription stuff, but now that it's this gray market, it's too big and I'm losing money because of it, right? There's probably only like 2 or 3 real markets where this is like a significant issue at all. And to support this kind of like series of very strong and wild accusations too, right? Like this is not just the CDC numbers, this is not, hospitals and gray market stuff. The James Beard Foundation just put out one of their like annual restaurant report things, and Axios, again, right, it came right up in my feed that they broke the story as part of like a special, special access. 10 out of 10 recommend that you go read the JBF report. It's amazing. I don't say it only because I agree with a bunch of the stuff in there and that I, personally believe it. I just think it's a great report. They're a great organization. In their report, they have a specific mention where they said that I think it's the only concern trend to grow between like chefs and owners and stuff like that. It went from a 7% like reporting rate to a 12%. Funny how that number keeps coming up, but this one's genuinely statistically insignificant. Of chefs and owners talking about the concern of the impact of GLP-1s, right? So it's like people being like, oh, hey, yeah, this is like, I don't know, I think it's getting weird. I'm reading a lot about this, or I'm thinking a lot about it, or I'm hearing about it in my personal circles and conversations. And that's cool. They kind of have this summary finding from one of the spokespeople in Axios where they say that they're like, the vast majority of restaurants are not building around GLP-1. They don't think that the economic impact is necessarily there, just that it is a rising concern and the only concern to move places between last year's report and this year's. So I think really in summation here, right, my coup de grace is I don't want to argue with you personally. I'm not saying that you're fearful or that you shouldn't believe this because, oh, you're just wrong, stupid, wrong. No, like, there's dozens of articles about this by major like industry outlets talking about this, talking about the percents, talking about these things without context, without telling you to really examine your revenue centers. Like I said, for example, right? Like if GLP-1 was really doing that much damage to the food industry as a whole, don't you think you would see like declining like McDonald's numbers posting because 20% of Americans are eating less and probably not having cravings for, fast food or something? I don't think you see that. If you have check averages that are down in certain revenue centers, then that tells you, right? I mean, exactly what's going on. I think that there's the wrong sentiments going on. I think people are trying to externalize the problem. What the problem is that there's changing consumer demands and people should be responding to those. If people want smaller bites, if they don't want dessert, if they don't want alcoholic beverages, then you have to deal with that. And I don't think that it's all driven by GLP-1. You can even argue, okay, well, I don't think that it is. It's just it affects it. Fine, cool. I really think that if you want to fix things, then adjust your menu, adjust your concept. Don't concern yourself with GLP-1 as how much of a factor it is. You're quibbling over very small percentage points for underlying tidal waves, right? Like drops in the wave. So GLP-1, of course, actually, right, does decrease alcohol cravings. And, the general non-alcoholic to low alcohol trend is continuing, growing, and I think actually more powerful than the GLP portion. So if you're looking for solutions to these kinds of problems, if you don't have a beverage team, if you don't have a mixologist, if you're hemorrhaging draft and bottled beer sales to a low to no alcohol trend and you need help please check out my website. I've got NA Beverage Controls and Design just got posted. It's a limited time offer to get in on the founders package for this. These are like the masterwork, the first version of this for deployment in the market. It has inspirational recipes, ratios, financial planning tools, including like sales projections, costs of goods, and all kinds of stuff in there to formalize and bridge the expertise gap for people, like I said, who don't have beverage teams, who don't have a mixologist, and who need to pivot and adapt to the changing marketplace. So thank you guys. I'll catch you later.